I want to say hello to everyone in our room here today. My name is Michelle Weber. I am with Conquer MG. I welcome all of you to this session to learn about what myasthenia gravis will look like in 2045. We have Dr. Henry Kaminski with us today with George Washington University and also MGNet. And if you don't know, Conquer MG is a funder of research through MGNet. And we work closely with Dr. Kaminski on that work. And so I'm going to quickly turn it over to him. And just one more reminder to please mute yourself if you're not speaking. You're welcome to ask questions during the presentation, either by raising your hand or you can put your question in the chat. The presentation should last about 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions after that. Dr. Kaminski, welcome, and thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to speak. And so let me get right into this. You see that the title is in 2045. So I'm sure all of you thought this was a typographical error, and this is 2025, which is exactly what I thought about 2.5 years ago when I was asked to give a talk about myasthenia gravis care and science 20 years from now, which I have to tell you turned out to be a very inspirational topic for me and a change in my general mindset. And this coincides with things you probably are hearing about in the news, but I'm going to kind of emphasize these things. So right now, there has never been such an acceleration in the kind of techniques that we can use in the big data analysis, use of electronic records. Everybody's heard about augmented intelligence now, but they are really starting to make significant changes in understanding of basic diseases to the point that every month there is I consider a mind-blowing article that comes out in the scientific literature, not necessarily related directly to myasthenia gravis, but clearly potentially impactful. Now, let me just take some quotes out of various pieces over the last few years that kind of support what I am saying here. And so this provocative title, "The Technology Advances Put the Annual Doctor Visit on the Critical Illness." So I'll read some of this. So again, the explosion of technology, imaging, gene sequencing, artificial intelligence will transform the physical. So Michael Bloom, a cardiologist and chief digital transformation officer at University of California, San Francisco. Mind you, 4 years ago, there was no such thing as a chief digital transformation officer. And now major healthcare systems and universities clearly are appreciating the need for a leader in this area. But he states, "I'll be able to do the same quality physical exam out of the office as if you were right in front of me." And you'll see where that comes from. So a few more pieces here. The Mayo Clinic expects to gather patient information from smartphones, smart apps, wearable sensors, blood pressure cuffs. I mean, that's being done. Blood oxygenation, that was done for some patients during the COVID pandemic. Physical activity, heart rate, heart rhythm, blood sugar, sleep quality. So just as an aside, just last week, there was a very large study that looked at Fitbit monitoring of patients to detect attention deficit order. And of the numerous metrics they used, heart rate was the most important predictor of an individual having attention deficit disorder. So, there's also unexpected things that are coming out of what's being studied. And so obviously, when you have a different way for doctors to interact with patients, that there's going to be change on each side and going to be challenges in doing that. But let me go on. So on the genetic side, I think many of you know that, like, for example, for breast cancers here, that has prognostic importance and also importance on how patients are specifically treated. But now also, and I'll emphasize this in another slide, just general genetic screening for known disease-causing mutations can help already identify patients in their healthcare system that need preventative care and early interventions. And that's just going to continue on a larger scale. And this is what I do want to emphasize here. This is very early on. So when you read about artificial intelligence, or I preferred augmented intelligence, making mistakes, absolutely. The technology is not ready. It's basically, one could say, a year and a half old since ChatGPT came out and was really useful. And now there's already new technological advances to make it more accessible, or at least these kind of augmented intelligence is more available for use, as opposed to right now, and some of the limitations of it. So, and that's true of the genetics. It's certainly true of our electronic health record. Epic was not designed to be research friendly, or friendly in many ways. So there's going to be continued advancement and improvements, and there's going to be mistakes made, and there definitely have been mistakes made in augmented intelligence or specific kind of lab testing. So that's awful, and so we have to tread lightly here, but we have to also appreciate that this can really accelerate our knowledge and information. So let me just give you some specific examples. Some of you may be already wearing glucose monitors that then you feed back not only information to yourself, but to your physician. I'm wearing a Fitbit. Many of you may have Apple Watches. There's other digital measures that can monitor blood oxygen, sleep, heart rates, and are really used already among the general public, and many of the general public are patients. So then there's kind of crazier stuff being developed. So here are these electronic socks that can detect your stride, whether how well you're walking. These could be used to understand and monitor patients with Parkinson's disease, or in a whole host of other situations. I had a patient today who was complaining about gait instability. It wasn't related, they were starting to fall on occasions. And so now there could be a new metric to really see how that patient is doing in the home environment, perhaps to detect specific areas of the home that could be fall prevented, or to also feedback physical therapy benefits to the patient and to the physical therapist and the physician as how a outcome is improving or not improving an individual. So just not to belabor this, there's a whole lot of these technologies being developed, and it's not just what you're wearing, right? It's the ability to transfer this information in a secure fashion from whatever device it turns out to be to the internet, which then goes to your electronic record, it goes to your physician. There might be alert systems to say, oh, wow, this patient has started to walk less, their step count is less, their sleep is not as normal, their pulse is increasing. Could this be a sign of myasthenia worsening before it's easily detectable? And I have a patient who tells me, every time I get an alert about my walking being unstable, I know it's time for my next IVIG. And if I don't get it, I just continue to worsen. So that's an anecdote, but I think it gives you an idea of the potential power of these kinds of things. And so I want to give you a very specific example of how impactful one of these measures is. So, and how rigorously these are evaluated. So I'll literally walk you through this, almost not literally, but so in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, so these are young people that really develop symptoms when they're 4 to 5, and now lifespan is extended, but still most patients die with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy in their 30s. And so there's a critical need to speed the evaluation of new drugs. And so this is where this comes in. The standard measure in a trial to measure an outcome of a drug or any sort of intervention is a timed walk, basically how quickly this child walks a certain length in the clinic. Well, so now this one company, Actinomyo, developed a ankle monitor that assessed how much the individual is walking, but also their speed of their step. And you don't have to, look at all this, but then it also connects to the internet, and so the scientists could look at what was going on with that patient. So what they wanted to do is show that this metric, this measure, this technology actually helped identify how the patients were doing, and that it could be used in a clinical trial. And the punchline will be on the next slide here, and you don't have to read this. That's not the point. The point is, what I'm going to be saying is, at first they had to make sure that this was tolerated, that the patients would actually use this, and they were measuring something that was kind of similar to what their walking test did. And so they used a small sample, 23 patients. You start small and then you move forward. And then you see another step. They want to see how reliable is it? Is it kind of measuring with a consistent manner and in a non-controlled setting? So in other words, it's all comers are looking at that. And they, again, obviously, where I'm going with this is there's kind of good stability. That's kind of varying, but not much variation week to week. And so they know that they're getting a good measure. So then they're comparing it to the best available clinical outcome measures, as we call them. So the 6-minute walk, there's another North Star ambulatory assessment, 4 stair climbing. Again, all these things that depend on the patient's walking, but that's a measure of how well they're doing. And they did this for a randomized trial here. But then the most important, they looked at 6 months to see if they could detect that a patient was getting worse. We know that the patients get worse over time, and could this identify a continued worsening in these kids? And again, it compared it to the best available tests. So they checked it out. They were very critical of how they were doing things. They compared it to the gold standards and then looked over time that it was actually measuring a change. So who cares? Okay, this is great. But what's the impact on patient care and evaluating patients in a clinical trial where you could test something? So this is kind of a mock-up of how you design a clinical trial. So you want to find an important difference between a group that's not getting a drug and a group that is getting a drug, the intervention. And you randomize them, you flip a coin, who gets what. You have a certain time period. And then here's the point. You look at your primary measure and statistically determine how many patients you need in this trial to detect a real difference statistically. So it's something that's important. So just to give you an idea, for trials in myasthenia gravis in a phase 3, so the largest trials, there's about 120 patients. In phase 2, which are designed to be smaller, there's at least 40 in each group. So, again, for myasthenia, a rare disease, it's hard to recruit all these patients. And so you want to get a measure that is as accurate and free of kind of random variation as you can. And so when you do this with this ankle bracelet measure, you need 28 patients for a definitive phase 3 kind of trial. So that's a significant reduction, and anything that reduces the time of the trial, the number in the trial, reduces the time of the trial, speeds evaluation to either prove that something's good or not. It's important to prove that it's not good also. And so then you think about these more rigorous objective measures can really have a potential huge impact. So let me cross over to some of the things we've been doing at GW along these lines. So I'll take you through this, but what were our goals when Mark Garbe, my colleague, who's an applied mathematician, and I started this study? We wanted to quantitate the neuromuscular examination. In other words, not just say, oh, there's mild weakness, moderate weakness, or significant weakness, like our clinical measures are. We want to be able to do this examination inside the clinic or outside the clinic. So when a patient is at home, again, thinking about, which I do, is research trials. We want to be able to do it anywhere in the world. And also because we're talking about the globe, we want to be able to apply this anytime. So hopefully this will become clear in my next evaluations. And this is just kind of a mock-up of a scoring system. So I'm sure many of you appreciate what you see here. There's some common tests that your neurologists are going to do in clinic. But part of this MGNet that Conquer MG supports, we have a research consortium where we did videotape examinations. This was thanks to the COVID pandemic, where everybody moved to telemedicine. So we developed a study to look at how valuable or how useful the telemedicine examination was in a standardized fashion. But my colleagues, Richard Nowak and Amanda Guidon, Vern Jewell, did recordings of these patients. So now we had a bank of recordings to assess. And you'll see, I'm going to give you a little bit more background here. This basically is saying in words what that picture said, but there was mild, moderate, severe. It's not, it's very judgmental. In fact, we have a paper that hopes to come out soon, that there's a lot of variation amongst examiners, even if they're board certified neurologists. So there's a lot of inconsistency, and inconsistency in a clinical trial leads to greater variation, which leads to you need to have more patients in the trial. So now let me just show you what we did, right? So we had these videos, and we developed an automatic detection set of metrics. And so here's a computer vision system, and which will automatically detect specific landmarks. The green is what we've put in, but this is where the computer has detected these landmarks. So you may think, well, that sounds kind of easy, but it really isn't, because you have a digital image. You have to have a computer say, oh yeah, that's an eye, that's a pupil, that's not a mouth, and detect specific landmarks, and then see if we can measure and detect the difference. Now, a GW-based neurologist did an examination of this patient before this examination, and he really didn't detect any ptosis. But if you look over time, there's definitely eyelid droop. So we have a very sensitive, and we don't have to say this is mild, moderate, severe. We can give you a number of what that is, and then we can follow that over time. Go to the next one. So that actually kind of summarizes, I should have had this as the first slide before this. There's machine learning techniques. As you know, there's facial recognition software and methods, and they're very well established. And so that made it a lot easier when we applied it to our system. And so let me just take you through this. We, in this case, it's the ptosis measure. These are individual control patients, individual in the black are patients without, individuals without myasthenia. We're very thoughtful on how we pick these controls. They were not just 22-year-old medical students, but we had individuals from age 20 to age 82. Half were women, 20% were Black Americans. We had a couple of Asian Americans also in this study, because it's important to get the diversity. We learned it's impossible to, with our present technology, to have this exam performed on somebody with a beard, so that's a little problematic for me. But then here's our range of patients with myasthenia, just with the ptosis. So we can detect various levels and severities of droopy eyelids. And just so you appreciate, right now, the measure done by physicians is it mild, moderate, severe, and it's at the end of the evaluation. So we can continuously monitor and have an end of the evaluation measure. And just quickly here, the same thing, we're able to measure arm fatigue. Again, I thought this patient was doing great, and he's felt so as well, but we're detecting some gradual fatigue, which does not occur even in an 83-year-old otherwise healthy patient, and that just shows the whole group here as well. And so let me get back to what I'm talking about when I'm saying any place, anywhere in the world. So this has been an evolution. So we had an examiner who did these evaluations and did the instructions, but that's really not necessary given the new technologies. So I am not sure the way I have the audio set up that you can hear this, but I will just describe this. This avatar is able to interact with you, guide you through the examination, tell you, okay, you need to look up, okay, give you encouragement, and also identify if the individual is not able to participate in the examination, and identify that there's some failure to this, and then be able to move on. So the ultimate goal is to be very interactive. Now, the value of this in a research trial is that right now, when you do a clinical trial, you have to train evaluators, research coordinators, to do these tests on a subject in the trial. And because myasthenia is a rare disease, you need 60 centers. So you need to train 60 people. And they all do this very differently, quite frankly, I have to tell you. And some don't actually follow the instructions. Typically, those are the physicians, not so much the research coordinators. And then people come and go. So you may train an examiner, 6 months later, a patient is recruited for the trial, the research coordinator leaves, and now you're stuck in retraining. This system will allow, just prevent that completely, because you are going to have one examiner, this avatar, doing the evaluation. And oh, by the way, these are international trials. this person does not have to speak English. They can be programmed to speak any language to interact. So any place, anytime, and anywhere. So now a sudden change. When patients come to me in clinic, I don't know what is the best medication for them, right? I can say, well, prednisone is highly effective, but there's a lot of patients that don't do well with it, cause complications. I can give you mycophenolate. Okay, well, CellCept, yes, that works in a lot of patients, but not everybody. Same thing with all these new FDA-approved medications. Not everybody does well with them. We can go into that a little bit more later during the QA. So I would really like to be able to have a set of tests to tell me how a patient is doing. And so that comes, or how a patient will do, and help me predict how to treat them. So this goes to the concept of a digital twin. So let me just give me a moment to kind of go through this. This is a very common approach in engineering, where first, let's just, as an example, Rolls-Royce makes jet engines. And so for every Rolls-Royce engine, there are numerous sensors on it as the plane is flying. And it detects an incredible amount of information, which then their computer models produce what's called a digital twin. So the engine is now within the computer, and you can change the parameters in the computer and see what happened, to see where the stress points are. And also simultaneously, you're getting more and more information from these new engines to feed into your programs to make them better. And so this technology has allowed them to improve maintenance schedules and reducing downtime. And the same kind of issue in these oil platforms. Tremendous amount of information. They make this digital twin in the computer to make predictions on how the system is working and how it's going to be perturbed. So, yes, humans are much more complicated, but ultimately, one day, our hope is to be able to really refine this for patients. So the idea, patient comes into the clinic, we put in various parameters, could be their whole genome sequence, everything that's happened to them, their smoking history, their alcohol history, things that we may not expect to be predictive of something, everything that we can get out of their digital records, their complete blood counts for the last 20 years. We produce this digital twin to see which is the most similar to patients that have responded, and we predict the drug that's best for this individual. That's the goal, that's the vision into the future. Are we there yet? No, but we want to be. And so this, I'll just skip over this. There have been studies that have used tremendous amounts of data to try to diagnose otherwise undiagnosed diseases. So there's blood chemistries, echocardiograms, MRI scans, clinical lab tests, genetic testing. So the ability to actually compose huge data sets are there. And there's groups that are trying to produce these immunological digital twins to be able to diagnose, prognose, and institute therapies. So we are trying to develop one of these for myasthenia gravis. It takes as much data as possible. So there's the thymectomy trial that was done and demonstrated thymectomy is beneficial for acetylcholine receptor antibody positive patients. Thymectomy plus prednisone versus prednisone alone. So we have this data set, and just very briefly, I'm not going to go into detail. with our initial models. Now, these are not digital twins. This is a approach to try to determine from a large data set what patients fall into poor groups. And we used a measure as in the trial, a patient needed to be on azathioprine. So that meant that the physician and the patient felt there needed to be an escalation in treatment with another drug. And so we're able to predict cohorts that from their initial presentation here, from the clinical characteristics when they first came in, that they would do badly or they would do really well. So it's a step in the right direction. One of the measures that we found is, otherwise not been demonstrated to be an issue in myasthenia, but I think we need a lot more data before I'm confident to say that. So how is this going to impact over time? Well, we'll be able to monitor people beyond their single visit. It is going to alter the way patients and physicians act. We'll have objective quantitative assessments, either when you're in your home, we'll have a better telemedicine examination, but that's standardized. We'll be able to record these visits to come out with a metric, or even the entire interaction between patient and physician to see what we can learn from that interaction. That little kind of dashboard I had with the scales, red, green, and yellow. We won't have red, green, and yellow. We'll have real numbers, but we'll be able to compare those from visit to visit, or not just visit to visit, but from a standardized examination that you've done at your home and fed to the physician. And I think, with this, we need to have physicians that are used to dealing with a lot of data and trying to react and prevent problems, as opposed to just waiting 3 months to see how the patient is doing over time. But if we're not spending as much time in taking a detailed history and reviewing medications because it's all there, or doing a examination because we already trust our digital metrics, we should have time to tell patients of how we treat them. So I think that should be the goal. I don't trust the American medical system to say that we're going to give more time for that, but that's really what should be the outcome of this. What do I think is not going to be here in 2045? Seronegative myasthenia. We will have a blood test that detects this. I think all these, we haven't really gone into the kind of the new therapies that are being developed and on the horizon. I really think some of these very non-specific treatments, and quite frankly, the newly FDA-approved medications will not be in use. We'll have a lot better things. Some of these, pen and pencil scales that we use will be gone. And something that I didn't really get into, but looking at large electronic medical records, we will be able to detect patterns that suggest that a patient may have myasthenia gravis and give alerts to physicians who are working with these patients to say, hey, order this test, they may have myasthenia gravis. So that's the vision here. Some of you out there might be saying, well, this is crazy. There is this Amar's law. We tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run. I think you're hearing a little bit like that artificial intelligence was going to save the world. Obviously, it's not. But then we underestimate the effect in the long run. So I think at some point we'll get this plateau and be able to really fulfill some of the things that I've just discussed. So some people ascribe this quote to Abraham Lincoln, but Lincoln scholars have informed the public that that's not the originator. But the most reliable way to predict the future is to create it. And so, that's really my mantra. And I think it's also the mantra of our research group that we have here at GW. Dr. Kushner runs the GW lab for myasthenia research. We have several postdoctoral fellows, and then this is the group that's really trying to move the technology piece forward. So I am done, and I'm happy to take questions about this, but also really any general questions about myasthenia unrelated to this.
For those who have questions, you can use the chat or you can raise your hand.
Yeah. I see the
Any
chat
questions?
now, so.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
So what's currently being done to on the front of seronegative, being able to better detect the different types of antibodies that are interplaying in myasthenia gravis?
Yeah, so I'll tell you about that. Kind of dovetails with the technology advancements. And so the way autoantibodies have been detected were really, okay, well, we're going to throw some human antibody on a muscle from patients with myasthenia, not with myasthenia, and see if they light up. That was kind of the 1950s version. And then there was this accidental, in some ways, identification of acetylcholine receptors antibodies, right? So the scientist was just trying to make antibodies in rabbits back in the 70s, and that's the way things were done. And lo and behold, bang, the rabbits got weak. And so he was smart enough to say, hey, there's something here to it. And so that's how that antibody was detected. And see, 25 years later, muscle-specific kinase was detected because we know that there are seronegative patients, and Angela Vincent and her colleagues started to look for antibodies that can be detected on muscle cells, that we started to learn because of basic science advancements that there's a lot of proteins at the neuromuscular junction. And so ultimately these MuSK antibodies were detected, and you could say LRP4 also, by just knowing what's there and looking for things. But to answer your question, there are now panels of peptides, small protein fragments and proteins that are put on little chips. And there's upwards of 6 to 10,000, depending on the technology, of these little peptides and proteins. And then you can throw serum from patients with myasthenia and see if we can, with seronegative myasthenia, see if we can discover a certain specific kind of antibody that we don't know right now. So are we there yet? No, but that technology that is being refined. There's still challenges with it. Proteins are very complex, and so they're in a living cell, so they're not going to be shaped exactly the same on a little chip like that. But it's a kind of technology that there's the hope to be able to advance that to a point that we can detect seronegative patients. And since this technology that I'm talking to you about is basically 2 years old, it's in its infancy, and so hopefully over the next 10 years we'll have that.
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah, I've got that. How common
Okay.
is neck weakness, and why is that not tested? So I can't give you a percentage of patients with myasthenia who have neck weakness, but I would say it's pretty common. I mean, I would I have had patients who come in, that's their chief complaint. I have patients with generalized myasthenia, and they have ocular symptoms, and they have trouble swallowing, and they also can't lift up their head. I have young guy who's 85 years old, and I think it's not just his neck, but he has an inability to stand up straight. And he's got acetylcholine receptor antibodies. I think actually that's the manifestation of myasthenia. So it's, you know, if you force me to give a percentage of my practice of patients who have some level of neck weakness, I'd say it's 20%. So it's not uncommon. It varies during the course of the disease. I would say it's important that there are other causes of neck weakness than myasthenia. And so this very challenging situation is when I've had a person with neck weakness and other symptoms of myasthenia, and all those other symptoms have gotten better with treatment, and they still have neck weakness. And those individuals may have what's called an axial myopathy. So the muscles that hold up the neck or keep you straight up are damaged, and it's not well understood, but they're not reacting to the myasthenia treatments. There's an EMG that can detect this. You really have to have an expert doing that. And so within a patient with myasthenia gravis, you have to look for other causes than just the myasthenia. But I would tell my residents they should look for that as a symptom of myasthenia. It's not uncommon. Yes, so this is going to be recorded, and so you'll be able to watch what I presented. What kind of support do you need from patient community and neurologists to move this AI forward quickly? So again, this is research, right? We got to do it very carefully, just like that monitor I talked to for Duchenne's patients that I talked to you about before. So it's got to be very rigorous. So, we had 52 patients, 104 videos in our initial study. Well, that's not adequate, right? And they were very carefully selected patients. But now we are doing basically all comers, from controls as well as patients coming into the clinic, to validate what we're doing, right? So that becomes messier, and also to do these repetitively over time. It's a bit of time. I'll get to answer your question in a moment. But in terms of the support, I mean, I think, especially given everything that's happened since January 21st, the most important thing that you need to do is support research. Otherwise, there will be nothing. There will be nothing, and it's already damaged. I cannot underestimate that. So that's what we as a population need to do. In terms of neurologists, this is kind of an interesting point. Back when the stethoscope was developed, doctors did not want to use it, because that's just like, what are you talking about? I'll just use this tube. It's gone. It's okay by me. It's not a problem. And you say the same thing, MRI scans. It's like, well, no, the CT scans are fine. This is the way we do it. With myelography is the way we do it. Obviously, that's wrong. So there's always this challenge in adopting new technology and using it correctly and becoming comfortable with the way it's done. And so I think especially neurologists, I think cardiologists will say, yeah, an echocardiogram is better than my stethoscope. But a neurologist is never right now going to say, yeah, I do kind of bogus examination, and it would be better to have a quantitative exam that's reproducible and such. And you know, you get 3 neurologists, you get 4 opinions. That kind of applies to this kind of situation. Because for over a century, the neurological examination is like the most precious kind of examination. You tap on a reflex, you make a diagnosis. That's what we're we're taught to do. I think it's changing with stroke with all the technology, but it's still very challenging in neuromuscular disease. Which is not to say that, oh, we do this little video and we whip out a score, that the physician is not going to like double check it, but that's their responsibility. What else is going on? We still have to listen to the patient. Maybe it's compromised by another problem. But I think really it's not just, you know, the video exam that we've done, but also the continuous monitoring that's really at the forefront over time to predict problems, which is what we want to do. And, you know, quickly, you know, it's not the Silicon Valley axiom of, you know, work fast and break it or whatever it is and fix it, you know. And so we're dealing with patients. We got to like do this methodically, thoughtfully, and you're gonna love this one. Because of all these new advancements and understanding of immunology and biology and the variation of patients from what we see in clinical evaluation, clinical trials, I think I know less about myasthenia gravis than I ever have, which, you know, a little humbling, upsets me a little bit, but it also says, okay, well, here are the problems we can define so that we can figure them out. And, you know, I think my colleagues here at GW have you know, said the same thing. So, yeah.
Any other questions from the people who are with us? And that's an interesting, yes, humbling point that you just made, not knowing enough about the disease. I guess someone who I don't have MG, it's like you've learned so much and therefore you've created a longer list of questions for which you have no answer yet.
Yes, that's very true. And I think, you know, what I just said applies to many diseases, right? I mean, we've learned a lot about cancer. We can treat some awful cancers now that we could never do. But then, and now that personalized medicine, as we call it, that we can define how to treat an individual with a certain type of cancer better. That's where we want to go with myasthenia, because I said, you know, as I said, like, okay, I can predict that a lot of my patients will do well with prednisone. They may even have relatively little side effects, and they get 20 milligrams for a few weeks and their vision improves. But then I have this, obviously not the same patient, but the patient has this exactly the kind of same age, gender, you know, history, and 60 doesn't work. They have awful complications. I get them on mycophenolate. That does, you know, that kind of situation. So, yeah, that's awful for everyone.
Do you see the next question in the chat? And I think this might take
Yeah,
us
no,
to
that's
the
a
end.
good. Yeah, are there others in MG arena working on AI? So AI is really a very broad spectrum of what you mean there. But there is really an amazing group out of the Charité Hospital in Berlin that is using a lot of data and analysis, a lot of data to analyze their patients. So they've also done these kind of what's called cluster analysis to see what patients are, how they're doing, how they respond, what are their clinical characteristics. So, from that perspective, I would say, this group is applying artificial intelligence to and kind of certain statistical analyses that are very sophisticated to patient information. And so I didn't really get into this too much, but Dr. Kushner in our group is also using the biological specimens from the MGTX trial, which it's to look at proteins in the blood and how they change over time, and are they predictive of outcomes. And again, this is like 600 proteins in the blood that couldn't have been interrogated otherwise. There's 6,000 genes in cells. We're looking at the DNA of the patients to see if we can, again, get predictive markers. So, I mean, literally, we started all this in the last 9 months, and so it's taking a while, and we want to try to integrate everything together. And, we have to work with a number of scientists who have expertise in that area. So it has to be very collaborative. But, I think, there's other groups at Yale, Dr. O'Connor, that applies certain mathematical techniques to analyze antibody data and such. But as you know, there's not that many investigators in myasthenia gravis, period. And so the ones that there are, they have their certain methodologies. But yes, I think there's a number of groups that are trying to apply these techniques in various ways.
I'll just say last call before we conclude. Any final thoughts or questions?
All righty.
Well, Dr. Kaminski, thank you so much for your time. I hope